Good afternoon and welcome to SBAM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications, and we appreciate you joining us today. Brian Kelly has another engagement, so we're welcoming back to the show Kelly Saunders. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Sarah. Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBM. Always a pleasure to be with you. And we've got quite a few things to talk about because Lansing has been busy this week.
Yes, indeed. It was a very late night in Lansing. The legislature was focused on passing the budget, and there are some other items that were not in the budget that we need to talk about as well. So we have some disappointing news. We do have some good news later on, but let's get the disappointing news out of the way, Kelly. And this is related to unemployment. What's going on?
Yes, and so late night and early morning. So the legislature came to town yesterday with the intention of finishing the budget. It was the main agenda item, but also with the budget comes some other agenda items. We know that oftentimes during a budget process, there are other issues that are leveraged in the budget process. And so they came to town yesterday. They gabbled in their respective conference committees at 9 a.m., went to session at 10, and they did not get done until this morning at 5 a.m. So it was a very long day for our friends across the street. That's one of the longest marathons I've seen in my time here in Lansing, going until 5 a.m. But there are numerous dynamics which we will work through on today's briefing. So, Sarah, to your point, some disappointing news. We've been keeping you updated about unemployment insurance, an effort behind to expand weeks from 20 to 26 weeks, and a potential benefit increase going from 362 to potentially 602. Last week, Thursday, there was a bill that was introduced in the House, HB 5827, by Representative Whitsett out of Detroit. And we were able to hold it off for a few days. Unfortunately, yesterday, the expansion of weeks from 20 to 26 weeks was put on the board in the House, and it was passed on party lines. 56 Democrats voting in favor, 54 Republicans against. I do want to say that while we are disappointed, we did a letter to the legislature laying out all the reasons why it was not a good idea to do this. We appealed to all the necessary leadership people that we needed to. Unfortunately, this did not go our way. I will say that we have been holding this off for a very long time. And so we can be proud of those efforts. But now the battle shifts a little bit in how we approach this. So it's not an immediate implementation. It only passed the House. It has to lie over in the Senate for 5 days for procedural purposes. They have broke for the summer. They are not scheduled to come back until later. However, now that it is sitting in the Senate, we know that the Senate has very little resistance to this. It doesn't mean that we won't lobby the Senate in these summer months and continue to make the case. However, we have a new battle on our hands. Additionally, there are still talks centralized in the Senate around that benefit increase from 362 to 602 from Senator Cherry. And so we really are going to be leaning on our partners and, of course, you, our membership, our small business owners who fund this fund on unemployment to lobby against this. And so we're going to put you on alert that this is our number one priority. And we're hopeful that we can have some robust conversations to either slow roll this, halt it. You know, we would love to see it stop, but the ball has started moving. And so we wanted to bring this to your attention. So pretty disappointing. We did express that. We sent out a special advocacy alert earlier today that detailed all of this. Please make sure that you check your emails for that, but putting this on your radar.
So, Kelly, you and Brian have been working very closely with Director Dale at the Unemployment Insurance Agency on the inefficiencies within their systems. Any update on what's happening there and what that could mean for us?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Sarah. We've been invited to the table by Director Dale over a year ago now to sit on a modernization work group. And it was really to address many of the inefficiencies and fraud that we saw through the pandemic, that essentially almost bankrupt the fund in totality because it was used as a social safety net. And Director Dale is doing, really a fantastic job to identify these inefficiencies, to bring claimants and to bring business to the table, and unions to talk about how we can have a system that is efficient. Now, that takes time. It requires a complete software upgrade. It requires an implementation. It requires training. That is a long haul and a big lift for a system that is heavily, used essentially and was essentially almost broken. And so our message to the governor, to the legislature is let the director do her work. She is committed to it, and there is a system that is about to be put in place that is completely different that does address those fraud issues. And so we have an opportunity to move towards a best practice to be a state in the nation that has a great UIA system, and trying to insert policies like an expansion of weeks and then also a benefit increase puts us at risk to have another monumental failure. So, why in the world will we be passing policies like this right now when we have a director committed to making the necessary changes to have a robust system that makes sure that claimants and employers are alike are supported in the best ways. Another point on this is that the trust fund that is obviously funded by employers was around 4.6 billion prior to the pandemic. Right now, as of today, it only sits at 2.6 billion. We should not be having these conversations until that trust fund is restored to what it was pre-pandemic levels. And once that happens, we can have these kinds of conversations. But until that happens, this is just irresponsible policy. And we will vehemently oppose these types of policies, all along the way. So that's where we're at, Sarah. Like I said, a little bit of salt in the wound, but we're going to continue to have these conversations, and we'll be engaging members at the appropriate time.
All right, speaking of engaging members, any advice of what members can do as we're kind of in this summer month time frame?
Sure. So if you're in your respective communities, many of your representatives and senators have coffee hours, or you know that. And so we would invite you to have these conversations on the front end, opposing these policies, flagging it, make sure that you're reaching out to them via email through their constituent services representatives so that they know how you feel about this, because we have to make sure it's on their radar. We have to create that pressure and that uncomfortability that they need to feel to know that this isn't good for their respective districts and that they're hearing from you. If you have a question about who your representative is, please feel free to reach out to SBM and contact Jacob and I, and we can help connect you to your respective representative or senator in where you live.
All right, thanks, Kelly. All right, let's talk about some good news that happened. Um, a couple of weeks ago, we had a press conference here in the office with another stakeholder, with our stakeholder group on childcare funding that was threatened to be stripped. But we have some good news to report. Tell us what happened.
Yes, this was the win of the day for us, and a big win at that. A couple weeks ago, Brian had a bunch of our stakeholders and partners, as you said, Sarah, in the office for a press conference to bring attention to a 30% allotment that was stripped out of the House budget to give to community-based organizations that are often private childcare providers that provide Great Start Readiness program resources to children in their respective regions. And for some people, it is literally the sustainability of their business to have access to those resources. Additionally, in the Senate, there was a pay parity piece that was put on the table that said that private providers that were providing these services had to equal the salaries of teachers that were also providing those services in their regional prosperity district. And we know nobody's arguing that childcare providers and employees don't deserve a higher salary. It's just that the revenue streams are completely different. In schools, it is taxpayer funded. We know private providers obviously are sustainable on their own. And so for that requirement to happen and for these two proposals to run alongside each other would essentially just decimate childcare providers that are providing this very valuable service to families and to the state of Michigan. We know that the governor has had a very intense focus on pre-K for all, which requires a mixed delivery model. It requires that the state ISDs and private providers cover kids in all these respective regions because of capacity. ISDs don't always have building capacity, they don't have staff capacity. And so, this is an all hands on deck approach across Michigan in order to be able to provide these services. So, when the House and Senate put their respective proposals forward, our message was no, the governor got it right. Stay the course, make sure that we are having this mixed delivery model. And that press conference was the impetus for basically the next few weeks of us putting the pressure on the legislature to take out, or I should say, to put back in that 30% allotment and then take this pay parity piece out. And we were heard. And it was because of our partners, it was because of members that were calling and being very, very transparent about what this would mean for their business. And we were heard. And so, thank you so much to all of you who participated in this. Advocacy works. And thank you for trusting us with this message, and to our many partners who came to the table from all across the spectrum to make sure that we essentially came alongside the governor and made sure that her recommendation got across the finish line. It was definitely a victorious moment for us last night, and we couldn't be more thankful to the legislature for hearing our cries for help, essentially, and making these changes so that we can keep our childcare providers whole, and hopefully not have these types of discussions again in the future.
No, it really is a great example of advocacy in action. The work that you and Brian and our friends and other business and organizations did is proof that we can affect change. So, again, great news there. So, obviously there's a lot of items that go into this budget process. What are some highlights on other items that the small business owners should know about?
Yeah, we always like to do a high level overview of what happened in the budget. Again, a very long 2 days, we'll just say. And so I'm going to throw some numbers at you. Feel free to follow up if you have more questions. But the fiscal year 25 budget totals 82.5 billion, including a general fund total of 15 billion and a school aid budget of 19 billion. And so there's a couple different sections I'll go through. A high level overview. We talked about the MIPSers controversy. They were having a hard time settling on how, there was 670 million that they could, essentially defer and not pay off early. And that really was the reason they were here so late last night. There was essentially a squabble, I'll say, between the education groups and the legislature and the governor on moving this forward. There was not agreement where they normally are in agreement together. And so essentially, the governor at the end of the day kind of got her way. And so 670 million can be invested into classrooms instead of helping pay off some of those retirement benefits. 50 million deposit into the budget stabilization fund, which is also known as the rainy day fund. We love obviously putting money away in case we have some issues. That now goes to $2.2 billion. Talking about education as a whole, 589 million spread across districts and ISDs and libraries, community colleges to offset retirement costs, which saves what the governor is saying, K-12 districts, the equivalent of more than $400 per pupil, which is equivalent to a 4.2% foundation allowance increase. 133 million, including 25 million in new funding to continue investments in student mental health and school safety. 200 million to continue providing universally free breakfast and lunch to Michigan's public school children. Again, a program that was introduced by the governor, I believe 2 years ago now, adding breakfast last year. So that program continues for her. 130 million for expansion into pre-K pre-K for all for every 4-year-old, like we talked about. That's 54 million for 5,300 additional children. 31 million to increase the full day child allocations to $10,000, 185. 25 million to open new classrooms in underserved areas, and 18 million to continue higher payments into transportation to help kids get to school. Lastly, 2 million to provide marketing and outreach, because we know some communities are not as reachable as others, and so there'll be a more intentional focus on those that may have not been reached. I'm sorry, two more things. 75 million to support students for before and after school programs. That's often provided by childcare providers as well. And then 65 million to fund a 15% increase for childcare and bonuses for childcare workers. So that is welcomed news. So that's the K-12 piece. Now shifting over to higher education and workforce development, something we care very much about. A 1.5 ongoing one-time increase for university and community college operations to support higher education learning that supports the governor's 60 by 30 goal, which we also support. 30 million investment to increasing the Michigan Achievement Scholarship that the governor wanted to focus in on. That was her community college guarantee, essentially. 52 million to continue Michigan Reconnect, which we have been very, very strong supporters of, which is a pathway to tuition free for adult learners 25 and older. If you recall, last year there was an effort to move it down to 21 and older. That now goes back up to 25 and older. That was just a one-time appropriation last year. And then lastly, Going Pro stood strong, a $54.75 million allocation that did not get an increase, but stays true to what it was last year. The governor has another section she calls lowering costs, which is essentially like giving your money back to you, what they call it. The fiscal year budget puts back 3 million to create a retirement program that is state managed, a retirement plan marketplace. If you recall, we had alerted you to some legislation that was being put through in the House by Representative McFall that was a mandated state IRA plan. We're in continuous talks with him. He understands our issues, and that's been halted for now. But there's also, excuse me, an effort by the governor to have a state approved plan that they would run as well. And so there is $3 million in the budget for that. We'll be watching that to see how that's managed, because we have an interest in this space. Continuing the EITC, which we support, that was quintupled last year for working families in order to help specifically working families that have children. So that was welcomed as well. Switching to economic development. $10 million for minority owned business grants. We'll see how that's administered, because we have interest in that space, of course. $100 million to construct more affordable housing. If you recall, the governor had a pretty robust plan in housing when she presented her budget back in February. So 1.4 billion to build or rehabilitate 10,000 homes, and 50 million to set aside for housing altogether. And then also 3.3 million for housing readiness incentive grant program. So that will be available to people who are interested in rehabilitating those homes as well. 500 million for SOAR. We've talked about SOAR and exhaustion. That's a program that the governor cares very much about, included in this budget. And then 60 million to establish an innovation fund, which is focused on startups. This one was kind of batted back and forth and wasn't sure that the legislature was going to approve it, but they did end up putting it in the budget. And then Pure Michigan, which we care about, 15 million additional to the 15 million coming out of the general fund. So 30 million in total We had kind of pushed for 50 million. I believe it was at 25 maybe last year. I might have that number wrong, but a little bit of an increase, which is welcomed as well. We definitely believe in the Pure Michigan campaign and the tourism that it brings here to Michigan. And then lastly, we in public health, we've talked about direct care workers and the push to have some extra funds that way, because we know that that is often an underpaid area. 28.7 million to fund a 20-cent an hour raise for direct care workers as well. So just a bunch of highlights from the budget. There's so much in there, and we're continuing to kind of dive into the numbers, but things that you may care about. And if there's other things you're interested in, again, just reach out and ask Jacob and I, and we'll look into it for you.
Thanks, Kelly. I know that it was a long night for all involved. So let's talk about one last item with the legislature. This is one item that they did not move, and that's the economic development package that we've covered extensively on this briefing. What held it up?
Yes. The governor's been saying for weeks, for months, she really wants an economic development package. And I think that there's a desire, in the legislature as well. The problem is that they can't settle on the details. There was a sore, I'll say, reorganization of how that was going to happen. There was the R&D tax credit that we had worked really hard on with members of the House and the Senate to get that to a good place. And there was this another plan on called Hire that we've talked about before. And the governor just really wants the package as a whole. And so it didn't move because there's just too much disagreement on all these different parts. And we had asked the question ourselves, like, can you just let R&D like pass and go, because it would benefit so many people, so many businesses in Michigan, big and small alike. And the answer was no, it has to move together. And so we don't know the internal dynamics and fully that those conversations have been had with the House and the Senate and the governor. But we're sad to not see specifically R&D move, but at least we know the deal. It's not going to move unless the rest of it moves. So that's the holdup, is that there's just not enough agreement on the package as a whole.
All right, we do have a couple of other news stories to cover today. There's some interesting news in the U.S. Senate race, specifically on the Democrat side. What's going on there, and then maybe give us a little bit of a insight as to the race as a whole.
Yes, so we'll dive into politics a little bit for the rest of this session, if you will, which that's my job to bring you that. So here we are. Um, uh, Alyssa Slotkin is the perceived frontrunner on the Democrat side for that open U.S. Senate seat that will be open because Senator Stabenow is retiring. And it really has shaped up between Hill Harper and Alyssa Slotkin at this point. Um, Nasser Badoun was running, and he did not make the ballot because he listed his PO box as his residential and not his residential. So he appealed that to the Michigan Appeals Court of Appeals. He was rejected, and so he has thrown his support behind Hill Harper and not Alyssa Slotkin. And we don't know how much of a difference this makes, but as people get out of races and they throw their support behind, it's an important time because Hill Harper and Alyssa Slotkin have started to go up on TV and digital. And so, him being able to gain a little bit of steam from someone who used to be his competitor is noteworthy. Now, I will say that as of March 30th, reminder that Alyssa Slotkin had raised $16 million and had 8.6 million on hand, and Hill Harper had raised 2 million. 800,000 of it was his own money, and he had a balance of a little less than 500,000. So, in the sense of having resources on hand, Alyssa Slotkin is way ahead. Now, on the Republican side, a reminder that former U.S. Representative Mike Rogers is the perceived frontrunner on that side. Justin Amash is also running. He used to serve in Congress. And then also Sandy Pensler from Grosse Pointe and Sherry O'Donnell from Stevensville. So we're getting down to the wire now. Primaries in August, and this race is starting to shape up. And other people are dropping out and supporting others, or they didn't make the ballot. And gonna maybe be on the trail with each other. So we'll watch that race. It's a obviously very important. And yeah, so that's the news of the day on the US Senate race.
Another important race here in Michigan is the 8th congressional seat, 8th district. So what's going on with that one?
Yes, so that is the race where Congressman Kildee has decided to retire himself. He has battled cancer in the last year and has decided to step down. We've talked about the Kildee dynasty, that seat has been held by Kildee for a very long time, and now it's kind of opened up. And on the Democrat side, we've talked about Senator McDonald Rivet being in the race along with a few others. And why I bring her up is because the governor decided to jump in this past week and endorse Senator Kristen McDonald Rivet in that race. We know that the governor is very popular in Michigan, specifically in that region. And so I think heading into that primary, it was time to kind of essentially make this big announcement that the governor is supporting Senator McDonald Rivet in the primary in that race. It releases her to obviously do some campaigning alongside the senator to raise some money. We know that the governor is very good at raising money. And so it's kind of a pivotal time in this race too, to have the governor support Senator McDonald Rivet. On the Republican side, that's still a robust primary. Paul Young seems to be the one that's leading the charge there. And so this district has trended a little bit more conservative over time. But Democrats do seem to do still very well. So again, we will watch this race. It'll be a very contested general for sure, one that the nation will be watching. And we know that national funding will be coming into that district to see what happens between the final Democrat and Republican in that race. But Governor Whitmer supporting Senator McDonald Rivet. And so that's the news in the 8th Congressional District.
All right, and one other election note for today. We have a presidential debate happening tonight. Any insight there?
Well, I've been reading some articles and I just, I think I can say this out loud. It's not going to offend anybody, but there's like a groan that comes out from everybody. And actually, there has been some polling in Michigan that has said uh, the collective response is here we are again. With, obviously a repeat of the last election between former President Trump and President Biden. And many people have said that they will watch tonight because they want to be informed, but their hopes are not very high. This is going to be a very interesting debate because there is no audience tonight. They've removed what they perceive to be distractions, and that the mics will be turned off when their collective time is up. And so CNN is hosting this debate. It'll be very interesting to see how both former President Trump and President Biden do in that kind of atmosphere. Um, there are obviously the people that are, diehard Democrats and diehard Republicans. They know where they're going to be. But specifically for here in Michigan, where we have a very large group of people that declare themselves as independents, they're the ones that are going to be focusing in on this kind of telecast tonight and trying to decide where they want to go. It has been said time and time again that the road to the White House leads through Michigan. And so, what are our people, our independents, going to say about these two? Where do they fall? There's been a lot of talks too about people not participating at the top of the ticket because they just don't know what they want to do. And so, we'll see how both perform tonight. These two obviously have a very combative relationship verbally. It's not like it ended well the last time they saw each other. And so, tonight, watch and see. We're just bringing it to your attention that there is a debate. Some of you care and some of you don't. And we'll see how it all works out. But let's just hope for some civility amongst this conversation, because at the end of the day, I think that's what we all want. Is just civil discourse is okay, but let's leave the insults at home.
I agree. I agree, Kelly. All right, that is our show for today. We will be back here Monday at 3 p.m. And then a programming note in July and August, we will be broadcasting only on Mondays. So 3 p.m. this coming Monday, and then again on July 8th. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.